What's going on, my dominators? Rico Garcia here, bringing you yet another exciting episode. Before we get started, let me just let you know that 678 Talk to Us is the phone number dedicated specifically to hear your voice, and we want to go ahead and hear from you. So pick up the phone, shoot us a call at 678 Talk, the number 2, and then us. 678 Talk to Us, and let us know your thoughts. Let us know your biggest takeaways from the show. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what guests you'd like to hear from, or just, what future guests you would like for us to have on the show. Or look, if you're an amazing entrepreneur and you've got an amazing story that you want to go ahead and share with our audience and with the world, then by all means, drop us a line. We'll give you a shout out on the podcast, and we get to say thank you for all of your love and support. Before we jump into today's show, I just want to give a big shout out to all of our sponsors, starting with our platinum sponsors, Lawyer Britt and Carlos Machine from Policyholder Advocates, both of which have the legal corner with Lawyer Britt and Carlos Machine with the public adjuster's corner as well. Again, utilize that phone number. If you've got any legal questions, if you've got any public adjusting questions, or any comments whatsoever, make sure that you go ahead and have a voicemail that's dropped. That way our pros can go ahead and answer those questions specifically for you. So big shout out to our platinum sponsors. Make sure that you tune into their episodes. This upcoming week, we're going to be dropping Lawyer Britt's episode. So make sure that you tune into that. And then the week after that, we're going to be dropping the Carlos Machine episode. So that's going to be really exciting, as there's been a lot of changes that have been happening in the insurance arena that affects not only public adjusters and attorneys, but also contractors and how we're going out there and doing our business day to day. So we're going to be covering a lot of really exciting stuff. You're not going to want to miss that. Also, another big shout out to C&R Magazine, which, by the way, if you haven't gotten your subscription of C&R Magazine yet, just head on over to candrmagazine.com. Upper right-hand corner of the screen, there's a big red subscribe button. Go ahead and smash that. Get your subscription. Keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in our industry. And last and certainly not least, I want to give a big shout out to Company Cam, but as per usual, we'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about them later on. Now, let's talk about this episode, which was really exciting. I really had a great time. Today we are joined by none other than Tom McGuire from Large Loss Mastery. And large losses have always been, for a lot of contractors that I've spoken with, this huge mountain, right? There's a lot of fear going into your first large loss. Sometimes you don't know what to do or how to even get started. And Tom has obviously got a tremendous amount of experience and trained tons and tons of contractors. Maybe some of you as well have been trained by Tom McGuire with Large Loss Mastery. And we had such an amazing time with this podcast, and there's so many takeaways. And for those of you out there that are looking to get into the larger commercial losses, this is definitely going to be the episode for you. So grab a pen, grab a sheet of paper. There's definitely going to be some notes there. There's going to be tons of links in the video description as well as in the show notes below. Make sure that you link up with Tom, check out Large Loss Mastery, and take your business to the next level. We cover so much stuff that I think you're really going to enjoy. So without further ado, let's jump into the show.
Owning any type of restoration business is demanding of your time, your energy, and resources. And that's why we're here. This is Restoration Domination. If you're a contractor in water mitigation, mold remediation, biohazard cleanup, roofers, or public adjusters, you'll learn how to dominate using some of the techniques and strategies that our guests will share. We'll interview top industry insiders, movers and shakers, hustlers and hackers, and anyone dominating their industry. This is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, and dominate. And here's your host, Rico Garcia.
All right, Restoration Nation, all my dominators out there. Tom, welcome to the show. Are you ready to help us dominate?
I'm ready to help you dominate, my friend.
All right, awesome, man. So cool. Do me a favor for everybody who's watching and listening. Maybe they're not familiar with the name yet. They haven't quite, taken a deep dive into what large loss mastery is. Kind of fill in some of the gaps on the intro. Let everybody know who you are and how you got into the business.
I'm Tom McGuire, and thank you, Rico. I'm very happy to be here. I started in the industry in 1986, I was in my sophomore year in college and was doing asbestos abatement, paying for school, which was really cool because back then asbestos was, before mold was gold, it was asbestos, and we were making good coin, and so I would put away money, and then I wouldn't work for the rest of the year, while I was in college. And I was always really good at project management and managing big, complex things. And so people that I was working for said, hey, would you ever consider leaving school and coming to work with us? This is what we're doing. We do asbestos, but we're also, getting ready to do fire damage restoration. And so I thought about it for a while, and then the next thing you knew, I was on a job in Dallas, Texas with a Kim sponge in my hand, cleaning a fire damaged little factory. Don't even know where it is or if it's even there anymore. And that's, was how I got into the industry. And after that, the travel and everything, I just really kind of fell in love with everything. We were in different places. We did projects all over the world. We were in Singapore, Kuwait, Costa Rica, Mexico, Canada. We're everywhere. And back when I started in the industry, there was only a handful of people that did large commercial projects coast to coast, and we were one of them. And I was just very blessed to come into the industry at a young age, and I was just surrounded by people who knew a lot more than I did, and that were extremely talented people that are still in the industry doing incredible things in the industry even today. And so then it just kind of went from there. I started working for Munters Corporation and worked for Munters for 16 years, and with Mickey Lee and another group of incredibly talented people. And that was a global organization. And so our headquarters was in Sweden. And so we did a lot of stuff, a lot of training, good quality training that was all over the world. And so that's kind of what got me ingrained with the training bug, and also to where it's high quality. And so that's, after Pure Clean, or after Munters, I left for Pure Clean. Was at Pure Clean for a couple of years, developed their large loss division, and then I decided to jump out on my own in 2012. And started my own consulting company and did a bunch of work. And then in 2016, I had a vision of starting Large Loss Mastery, which is the training program that we put together. And it's a very unique program, all based on the best practices that we learned. Because back in the day when we were in the 80s, IRCRC was where you went to get your certificate for carpet cleaning. There weren't any rules. Right. We were making up the rules for the foundation of what is the industry today. And so, but what's happened over time, we have all these training courses now that teach people, how to do a lot of great things. But they left out the best practices that have worked for over the entire length of the industry, the history of the industry. And so what we've done is we've brought all those best practices and then introduced some production rate estimating and calculating, and some unique ways of looking at large loss and estimating large loss that eliminates a lot of the everyday headaches. What we want to do is, if someone brand new can come to us, and we're going to give them the tools that will equalize them in some ways, not always. They're not going to be equal in money or talent, but they will be able to put together an estimate, scope of work, and a contract after going to one of our classes, regardless of what kind of skills you have. And then we also get into complex project management, which is one of my favorites. I was very blessed to have worked on some of the most incredible projects that have ever been. Just blessed with this whole thing. So I love the restoration industry. I've seen it come from that, where we're just a few companies to where now I don't even know how many companies there are now. I think there's
so many different numbers out there floating around with, no one can really put their finger on an exact number of restoration companies out there, right? Especially since we notice like a lot of plumbers are getting into the industry and vice versa. So there's this whole dynamic there. So just to start diving deep into this whole large loss concept, right? Mm-hmm. Large loss is rather scary for a lot of entrepreneurs, right? Because for several reasons, right? It's a matter of personnel, it's a matter of scope, it's a matter of equipment, it's a matter of how to mitigate risk. Are you going to get paid? Are you not going to get paid? Right? There's all of these things are potentially in people's minds that are holding them back from possibly executing on going after large loss, right? So kind of walk us through step by step, right? And I would say probably like step one is, when should someone go out there and start learning about how to manage these projects, what is required, what's needed, how to position themselves in the marketplace to possibly even be in the running to, capture some of these projects. So kind of walk us through that initial phase of when someone should be going out there and starting to learn about how this whole new world works.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about large loss, and the thing to keep in mind, is large loss isn't necessarily a big job. Large loss is really more a complexity. How is it a complex project? And it can be of all sizes. So it can be 50,000, it can be 50 million. But they're all essentially the same. If you're doing everything right on the smaller jobs, you're going to do it right on the bigger jobs. The main difference between a small company and a big company, and so a smaller company that's doing residential versus a bigger company that's doing residential and large loss, is going to be resources. And you touched on it. It's financial resources, it's equipment resources, it's personnel resources, and then it's knowledge resources. Where's your experience, your knowledge base? And those four things really make up what it takes to prepare yourself for large loss. And so when you want to start preparing is before you're in large loss and before you get one. And what we do is we provide everybody with those best practices that you can get that next loss the next day and know and have a clue about what you want to do. We remove the blinders, we remove the butterflies because a lot of people do that. They go, man, I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if we can do that. But once they do a big commercial project, there's no you're not
hooked, right?
Yes.
Once you go commercial,
yes.
You don't go back, right?
Well, you have to keep all of the things that are the headaches, for the bread and butter, your residential, your program work, whatever it is, they're pain in the butt, but they pay the bills.
Right.
And so you want to have those as part of your pie, your section. But large loss is really just it's people get in that box and they're like, man, oh no, we don't do large loss. And I always tell people, well, you haven't done it yet.
What do you think mentally is that one thing that, the most people's initial response is, well, I don't do large loss. Do you think that there's just a psychological barrier? Or is it just that they don't know really what it takes? Does it just sound bigger and more complex than possibly what it is? I'm not saying that it's easy, right? Those are two different things. But do you just think that people just have this, nightmare in their head that doesn't necessarily apply to them?
You can psych yourself out. And I've been blessed to where, all I've done is large commercial projects. And so residential projects to me, I've done, after a hurricane here, for my friends, for at our house, things like that. But it's really, and that's one of the main things that we focus on is removing the blinders and getting everybody outside of the box so that they can look at it and see that, okay, this isn't that big a deal. And what I always, if you have your resources in order, and sometimes it's good to team up with a larger company that will kind of give you some, some of their leftovers, or use you as a first responder in an area that maybe they don't have an office. And so that's a good entry point for a lot of companies. But if you have your 4 resources in line, your equipment, your people, your money, and your knowledge, then you're ready. And so we remove those blinders so that we break the jobs down to where we always want everybody to be thinking, what if, how much, and how long, no matter where you are. If you're walking through an airport, if you're at a baseball game, at a football game, at a huge arena, we want you to be looking around thinking, okay, what if, how much, and how long what would it cost, how much long would it take? And so what we do is we bring in some really cool case studies that all of a sudden they find themselves being able to estimate and put a scope of work and a contract together on a project that, the day before that they came into our class, they wouldn't have had a clue to where to even start. And so when they're done with one of our large loss mastery classes, they will be looking around going, what if, how much, and how long? And they'll have a square footage number in their head for the type of damage, and because we teach a lot of very unique tools that have been around for centuries. And for example, production rate calculation for people. We're all familiar with the production rate calculation for our equipment. We have lots of classes that we go to for sizing equipment. And when we're talking CFM and gallons per day, what are we talking? We're talking about production rate. But rarely does anybody talk about the production rate of people. Because how important is that to know what the production rate of people, that allows us then to know how many people we need to complete the task. And so you see production rate everywhere. It's just not really talked about it that much. So in every factory in the world operates on production rate. How much one person can do in a shift or an 8-hour period. How much a robot can do in an 8-hour period. That tells us how many robots or how many people we need to complete the task. Even lawn mowing. If I'm mowing, if I have a lawn service and I have 100 acres of lawn to mow, what do I need to know? I need to know what one person can do in an 8-hour period. Tells me how many mowers I need, tells me how many people I need, tells me how much gas I need, tells me how much equipment I need. It is fundamental to everything, and it's been around for centuries. And so what we've done is, over the last 40 years, a very good friend of mine, Brad Key, he's a stats guy and a numbers guy, and Brad has collected just an amazing amount of data. And he created what was called the matrix. And the matrix was this matrix where you could determine what the production rate of your people were for each different project. So if you were in residential, if you're in a hospitality, if you're in a office building, everything has a production rate, a starting production rate. And then the other factors that kick in is, what type of damage is it? What other factors are going to affect how we work? And so what I've done is since then we've taken all this information and plugged it into our class and then into into the estimating tools that we have, which are the fastest estimating tools in the industry. And we have a lot of fun with it, because the first thing that people are like, man, that can't be that easy, but it is. And we've made estimating and scoping more difficult than ever. And it drives me nuts.
You mean as an industry, correct?
As an industry overall, I think we have some amazing tools. We have some, Matterport, we got, your TNM Pro, we've got Xactimate, we've got all these amazing tools that are out there. But the one thing that has improved our business, but the one thing that really hasn't changed is how much one person can do in an 8-hour period. Because remember, I said my first job, I flew to Dallas, and next thing I knew, I had a Kim sponge in my hand. I go to any fire today, and I'm going to see somebody cleaning a wall with a Kim sponge. Right. And it hasn't changed, and it's universal, and it can be used anywhere in the world.
Have you noticed, through obviously your teachings and whatnot, most of us entrepreneurs really spend a lot of time tracking numbers, but like you said, there's certain important numbers that a lot of entrepreneurs are missing, one of which could easily be, labor production rates. Have you noticed that that's one of the, missing key elements in, estimating and factoring how long a job is going to take? And do you feel that a lot of companies are maybe missing the boat when it comes to that particular number?
Well, they are, and that's the reason why there's so many third-party consultants out there reviewing bills. And the matrix that I was talking about has been around for 25, 30 years. And the third-party consultants out there, you can name any of them, they all have a version of this. It's all from that same spreadsheet and same information that was created 35 years ago, and that we've updated now, and it's still extremely accurate. But what happens is guys will get onto a project, and they'll load it up with labor and not know how much labor it should actually take. The project will be over budget, and there'll be a third-party consultant calling them up about the file, and they'll ask him, why do you have so many people on the job? And they really can't give an answer, but the consultant can give them an answer. Well, here's how many people you should have had on the job. And then as the contractor that doesn't know this information, you're sitting there and going, well, how did you determine how many people I should have on my job? Well, the information and the data is out there, and it's very accurate, and it's been used for, like I said, the last 30 years. And so those are some of the things that we teach right off the bat. The first day that you're in the class, you can come out and your estimating skills will go up dramatically, and you're going to have a totally different outlook on projects. And so we break it down and bring in those tools so that when people leave one of our classes, they have everything that we could possibly give them to make their businesses a better, more successful. And it's really that, and giving them the tools that nobody has given them before, because because to be perfectly honest, like the Edge, which is 1.5 years old, was a tool that I've been wanting to develop for years. And I wish I would have had this back 20 years ago. We'd be in a different world right now. But it's all based on historical data, what has worked. It's not speculation or anything. It's all proven. And that's what's beautiful about it. It's all of these are proven techniques, and they're still utilized, but they're not taught to the mid-level restoration companies, the smaller restoration companies. And so they're kind of lost. Right. And so the smaller and mid-level restoration companies can find themselves kind of in a spot where we were back in the 80s, where you're making up the rules. Right. But then once you come into somebody who knows the rules, like someone like myself can look at the file and look at the type of project it is, and I have a square footage number in my head, what it should be. And a lot of third-party consultants, a lot of consultants out there, you can JS Helds, the Meridians, the Young and Associates, all of them utilize the same information, the same data that we are also providing to the restorer. We're the only one that's giving it to the restorer and not using it against the restorer. We're giving it to the restorer to
actually make their life a little easier, right? So
level a playing field.
Exactly.
Let's get you guys in the game, and to when that's the whole thing, is to remove the blinders, make people see that they know more than they think they do, and they're closer to being ready than ever before. So really, guys.
So at the end of the day, like, it's really step one here for anybody who wants to get into larger losses, commercial losses, and they've been a little gun shy. Really, it's about getting the education that they need first and foremost, which just by having that alone and being armed with the right information, all of a sudden now you've got that, at least that theoretical preparation, like ready to go. Now at that point, it's just waiting to get lucky, right? It's not waiting for that opportunity. I mean, it kind of is the definition of luck, right? Preparation, opportunity.
Preparation.
There you go. So really step one, it's, hey, even if you're not necessarily ready, even if you've been a little gun shy, maybe you have some misconceptions about what large loss is and how it can affect your company. The first, best, fastest way to kind of eliminate a lot of these doubts is, hey, let's get educated on the process. Let's get educated with people that actually have the experience. Because look, there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are in the restoration arena that don't have a mentor. They, I mean, you just don't know what you don't know, right? So being able to team up with somebody who's already been there, who's done that, and provide you with that confidence to say, hey, by the way, this looks really difficult, but here's this simplified formula that makes this really complex thing actually pretty manageable, right? And that's kind of the secret sauce. So once someone gets that, now the question becomes is, how does a company or an owner position themselves as a solution for these larger losses?
Well, there are several things that you can do, and what I always recommend to mid-level restoration companies that are, or smaller restoration companies that want to do more commercial loss or get some experience on commercial losses, is team up, with a strategic partner. Somebody that's bigger than you, somebody that's got bigger wallet than you do, and work with them as one of their first responders. And, for example, CAT work, when it comes to catastrophe, if you don't have a reason to go to CAT, don't go to CAT. You will just end up spending $50,000 to $100,000 in mobilization. And if you want to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on a vacation in a hurricane zone, that's a waste of money.
Right.
And so I can think of a lot of vacations, Maldives, I don't know, something, something else. But team up and because a lot of, we live in this world where everybody's getting bought and, all of this stuff. And one of the reasons why that's happening is because of footprint. Everybody's looking for footprint. But not everybody has coverage. And so there's some very large companies in this country that, for example, may be on the West Coast and they don't have, say, an office in North Carolina, but they're a West Coast company, $500 million company, but they don't have an office in North Carolina. So if you are in North Carolina and it's worth the research to find out, okay, who doesn't have an office here? And because when there's a hurricane or something comes along, you can be their first step. And what will happen is when you're that first responder for them, they're going to come on that job that you're found and they're going to take it over, yes. But you're going to get paid for being that first responder. But guess what's going to happen? is they're going to get busy, and all of a sudden they're going to start feeding you commercial work that they can't handle, smaller stuff. It might not be the Ritz-Carlton, it might be, Jim Boys or pick a restaurant or whatever, things like that can really start to drive your business, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a different spot after a catastrophe. So I always look at, if you're not in large loss yet or large commercial, get with a strategic partner, maybe someone that needs you in an area because they don't have a footprint, or if there's somebody in your area that is a big company that you can offer them a service that blends with theirs, then you kind of get mentored through their experience. And so I always recommend that. But then, be ready for when it happens for you, because you might get that call or be in that spot. And I was on the team that did the World Trade Center back in 1993 after the first bomb. And that was one of the largest projects ever done, and 8.8 million square feet. And what I always tell all the guys that come to my class is, think about that. 8.8 million square feet. There still hasn't been a project that big, and just strictly mitigation project. And think about that. And I asked him, I said, how big a company do you think that was? How big a company do you think we were? And I think at the time we were about an $8 million company. Everybody that worked for, except for maybe 10 people were on call. I was an on-call supervisor, project manager. I would go out and work a lot and then go home and sit on the beach at Lake Tahoe, or go skiing, or something. And so we were on call. And so here was that company, the $8 million company with 20 employees doing one of the largest projects ever done. And so not everybody's going to have that opportunity to do a World Trade Center, but guess what? It might not be a World Trade Center. It might be your World Trade Center. It might be the biggest job that you've ever done that comes along. And the key is being ready, because there wasn't anybody on our team that didn't think that we could do that job.
Right.
We all knew that we could do that job.
There was probably a lot of the quote unquote competition, if they would have been privy to how the size of the company, who probably said they can't do that job, which is totally different, right?
Well, now you have a lot more companies. And so back then, there was still only just a handful of big companies that did big commercial projects, across the country.
Right.
And when you start to break it down that way to where people can look at it and say, okay, well, wow, that happened.
Right.
And it can happen to you also. It might not be the World Trade Center. It might be the Ritz-Carlton, or it might be a nice office building in town, or, it could be an event venue. It could be a variety of things. But the key is to always be ready and always be asking yourself, what if, how much, and how long. And if we're always in that state of mind, for me, that's always running. Every building I go into, I'm always calculating, okay, what would it cost, for this type of loss, if it's a fire or just purely water or whatever it is. And so those are tools that we try to give everybody, so that we can start to break down some of the barriers that, quite honestly, the industry, the carrier world, and they like keeping everybody in a little box, and don't think outside the box. Keep doing things the way that this. And I try to remove the blinders and remind people that there are other ways to do this, because we've been doing it for 40 years.
Right, exactly. So obviously, having the know-how, the technical know-how, the mentorship, right, removing the blinders, as you say, that's, step number one. Step number two is, maybe if you're, small to mid-sized organization, you haven't really done anything with large loss, a good strategy that you would recommend is, hey, link up with somebody who maybe doesn't have a local footprint. Link up with somebody who's got maybe the deeper pockets than you do. Maybe they have more experience. Maybe you can leverage that. Maybe you can bring certain resources to the table and be useful to them. Maybe look, again, something that I say all the time, like 1% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And if you gain either experience and or meaningful relationships along the way, then all the better. So real quick, what I want to talk about is, now that we know how we can kind of start positioning ourselves, and we don't have those butterflies in our stomach as much as we did before, we feel confident that we could potentially take these on. Maybe we've partnered up with a couple of individuals. Now what I want to talk about is, number one, how to sell the jobs, and number two, how to potentially estimate these projects, these more complex projects, in an easier, not crazy convoluted way. But before we jump into that, let's just go ahead and take a quick moment and thank our sponsors. Hey, Restoration Nation. So real quick, I want to talk about your estimates. And being in the restoration industry, look, we have to make sure that our documentation is super tight and it's on point, and we want to eliminate as much back and forth with the insurance carrier as much as we possibly can. And this is why I want to talk to you about Impartial. And I really love the name because it's supposed to be impartial. Kind of get it? So the reason why this is such an amazing software is because it uses the technology that most of us are already using, which is the Matterport technology, and then basically makes this on steroids when it comes down to building your estimates. And Impartial has three main offerings that I want to talk to you about real quick, starting off with Impartial Scope. Now, when we're talking about Impartial Scope basically allows you to generate a carrier-approved worthy estimate. And basically the way that it does this is by extracting all of the relevant data from pre-mitigation as well as your post-mitigation scans, and packages this up in such an amazing way to where it eliminates so much back and forth. And again, the whole idea as our industry evolves is to harness the power of this kind of technology. Not only that, but it also has another offering, which is Impartial Embed. And basically what this does is it gives you the ability to go ahead and tag with highlights, your general scope notes, mitigation activity, moisture readings, and so much more information. You even have the ability to go ahead and upload JPEG pictures, PNG, ESX, and so much more right into the Impartial tags, which makes your documentation that much more tight, which ultimately leaves less room for people on the other end to have much of an opinion as to what your estimate is about. Because again, this is all about harnessing real physical data. So not only that, there's obviously a lot of industries or a lot of instances where you're going to need to make some changes to your estimate. And lately what we've been seeing is a lot of back and forth between Xactimate and Symbility, which leads us to Impartial Convert, where it basically takes any estimate and can change it between Xactimate and Symbility and vice versa, and really makes this entire process very, very easy. And we've got something really special for you, Restoration Nation, for listening to the show, watching the show, and it's an amazing offer that I want to go ahead and extend to you. And that is, if you head on over to info@Impartial, and that's impartial.io/domination. And again, the link is going to be in the video description as well as in the show notes below. You're going to get an amazing offer, and that is a total of 99% off their enterprise plan. So just go ahead and visit info.impartial.io/domination. Go ahead, check them out. You're going to be happy you did. Photo documentation is possibly one of the most important aspects of what it is that we do in the restoration business. Not only so that the client knows exactly what's going on, but also so that you can prove your work to insurance companies. One of the best ways that I found to go ahead and document our projects is by using Company Cam. Company Cam is an amazing app. It has so many features, everything from time-stamped and GPS located photos, individual project files, unlimited photo storage, in-app communication with your crew, a live stream of all of your projects as the photos are coming in, as if it was an Instagram feed. So from a managerial standpoint, Company Cam can help you there as well. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to protect your organization while documenting and keeping everything nice and neat. So we've got a really special offer for you. If you go to companycam.com/dominate, not only will you get your 14-day free trial, but you're also going to get the first 2 months 50% off. So again, head on over to companycam.com/dominate, get the app, and I'm sure you're going to love it. All right. So we are back. So a couple of things that, we kind of left off on, right? Number one, how to sell the jobs. That's probably like a lot of our listeners right now, like, okay, cool. Well, this great. I can go out, I can get the education. Yeah, I probably have 1 or 2 companies in mind that I could potentially strategically partner with, or maybe they're listening and they're like, you know what? I'm ready. I can do this myself. How should people go out? Do you have any recommendations on how to, position themselves as an organization, and then how to go out and start knocking on doors, shaking hands, kissing babies to actually start closing some of these deals?
Well, the main thing is be active, and because one thing, once you're on a big job with a restoration company that you might be, just subbing one of their subs, you'll look around and go, man, we could do this. I mean, this isn't no big deal. I mean, we could do it better than that. Man, look at that. They're getting away. They can do that. And so once we get to where you're thinking, your mind is in the right place, and you are, the number one thing is hustle, and don't stop hustling, and hire hustle. And because if you got a salesperson out there that hustles, and they, love to talk to people, love to network, there is so much opportunity out there in the world. There's so much property now, so many condos, and you live in South Florida. There's high rises. I'm in Central Florida up here in Cocoa Beach. We can't build over 8 stories here, so we don't quite have the same dynamic. But it's being active, be involved in your community. Know where the work is, because it's just not going to come to you and taking cookies and dropping it off to somebody. That's not going to happen in the commercial world. And so when it comes to the commercial world, you want to be involved in the communities. Make sure you know where the work is. Make sure you're talking to business owners. Make sure risk managers, any of those types of groups you want to be a part of. And anyone that BOMA is always a good one to get into. Back in the day, there wasn't what it is now, to where there's a jillion people in it, to where you kind of get lost in the shuffle. But always find a way to stand out from everybody else, because otherwise you will always get lost in the shuffle, because there isn't any part of our industry that isn't crowded right now. I mean, there are people, in areas there where there's the city's divided up, and it's a 50,000 person town, and it's divided up in 100 ways. But don't ever let that discourage you from talking to, facilities managers, getting in and talking to people at schools, courthouses, any hotels, find out who, what hotels are owned by what groups, because they're usually owned in groups. Get involved with and understand who is doing the large loss, who is moving and shaking in the area that you might want to get into. And you might be able to then pinpoint who you want to go after, and with the little sniper approach to talk to them about business opportunity. And so just mainly hustle, always pay attention, get involved in your community, know what's going on in your community, what construction projects are coming along, what thing, because I can tell you one thing, that is a good little inroad for a lot of smaller companies or construction companies. For example, we have a lot, resorts. We
Right.
live in Florida. There's a lot of building going on all
right.
the time. And guess what happens to all those buildings? Almost every one that is built. Guess what happens when they turn on the water for the first time?
Right, exactly.
There is a flood, and if you are the first call that they make, and they're like, boom, we got to call, we got to call Rico, boom, and there you go, you're there. So guess what happens now? You become their go-to on everything. So now when a hurricane comes in, now all of a sudden you went from just doing their little stuff, little broken pipes or little somebody forgot, that to actually put a shower head on before they put the sheetrock on, and so they turn the water on and there's water everywhere, and that happens. You would be surprised at some of the resorts in Orlando that we've been to many times, just on simple stuff, because it's not something you're going to hear about. It's not on the news, and it's not on the Weather Channel. This is bread and butter stuff that when that event happens that is on the Weather Channel, you want to be the guy, that 20-story building that's just being built. You want to be on their list of okay, well, these guys do a killer job for us every time that we have something come up. We need them on speed dial for this hurricane.
You want to be vetted already.
Yeah.
And proven already before you even,
Yeah.
get your foot in the door. Like that totally 100% makes sense. And the other thing too is that, and again, this doesn't mean that these are necessarily much smaller projects. It just means that you're coming in at a different level,
Yep.
right? And over time, just it kind of compounds
Yes.
on itself, which is really interesting. So now, what advice would you give as far as estimating? Because again, like you said, the industry has made estimating very complex, sometimes more complex than it might need to be. What are some of your tips or tricks to walk into a building and walk out in a reasonable time frame and have a reasonable number that you would feel comfortable with as an organization? Is there anything special that you would suggest someone to take a look at?
Well, yes, because I have software that will help you do it. You can walk a project and go sit in the parking lot and have a number. And so what we try to do, and see, I try to utilize data, historical data, and trends, what works, and percentages, and all of those things. And so what drives me crazy is, how many times are guys going to measure a 2,000 square foot home or a 1,500 square foot home or a 3,000 square foot home? I mean, there was probably a 2,500 square foot home that's been measured in the United States probably about 200 times just today. And it bothers me that what are we doing with that data? Why are we not utilizing that data that has been gathered on all those properties? Because guess what? There's no difference between it. All the difference is what type of damage is it. What's the severity of the damage and what type of damage it is. And so what we've done is we've created tools based on historical data, because we don't ignore the data and just keep measuring. What we don't have to measure anymore now but once we do our damage assessment, if we know the square footage of the damaged area, we know the type of facility, we know the type of damage, we know is the power on, is the water on, we know all these details that we're going to do in our damage assessment, then we can put that together with our time frame. So once we know the square footage, the calendar days to complete the job, and the production rate of our people, we can estimate any project in a very short period of time. And it's really that easy. And all the things that we've put into it, I love it because it is fast and accurate. and we put it up again. We put ourselves on a spot where, somebody will have a project and they'll have information and they'll plug it in and we'll be within 5 to 10% of a project, and then we'll ask, well, how long did it take you to get your original estimate together? And it was like 2 days, and we just did it in 45 minutes.
Right, which goes to show having a formula for anything in life just makes it that much faster,
Yes.
that much easier, that much more enjoyable to do, right? Because again, if it's not enjoyable and if you're spending 2 days on putting together an estimate, a lot of people shy away from that. They're like, you know what, I don't want to deal with this right now. So that would be the way to some of the tips on how to, put together an estimate is obviously, having this amazing formula. Now, what do you say to with regards to mitigating risk? Because every project that any company takes on has a certain amount of risk built in, right? And again, it's based on scale. How many people are you going to have on that particular site? There's a financial risk that's associated as well. There's all of these different variables tied into any project. When you're talking large loss and a complex project, as a company, are there any things that the owner should be looking at to try to help them mitigate risks on that particular project, whether it's, obviously safety risks or, more on the financial side? Where could they potentially be blindsided at, or where have you seen companies be blindsided at just because they didn't quite assess the risk properly?
Well, number one, when you get into commercial loss, make sure that you know what you don't know.
That's a tough one.
Know
what you don't know.
Yeah, because that's something that I ask myself all the time. It's a program that constantly runs in my head. It's okay, what don't I know? What don't I see here? Everything is going right. What could go wrong? And so, in what we don't know when we first get on a commercial project, or we're called on a commercial project, if it's somebody that we haven't done work with before, we don't know that company. We don't know how they pay their bills. And so we need to, number one, do a little homework and find out, who are we doing business with? How do they pay their bills? Do they pay their bills? The number one rule in restoration is you are a restorer, not a bank. And the bank is down the street, and they charge interest. And the restorer, a lot of times, is afraid to even ask for money. So, number one, know who you're dealing with. Number two, ask for money down. It's traditional, and the adjusters are expecting it, but they're not going to remind you if you don't ask them. Right. And a good friend of mine tells me all the time, if you don't ASK, you don't GET. It's been around for a long time, but if you don't ask, you don't get. And so always ask for money up front, always at least 25 to 30% down, and then do progress billing. And so that if there's a problem with the project, you're going to find out in that second invoice. Okay, well, that hasn't been paid yet. Why hasn't that been paid yet? And because everybody has to understand is that this is a business, and the client, whether he's a homeowner or whether he's a small business or large business, they have to understand that this is a business. This agreement that we are making between us right now is a business agreement, and this is a contract. It's a legal contract. It's between you and I, and the adjuster is just somebody that is going to pay your, but our contract is between us. The adjuster doesn't sign the contract. And so we always have to keep that in mind. Who are we working for? And make sure that they understand that this is a business decision, or that this is a business opportunity and working together. And so, and with that business comes payment. And guys are afraid to ask for money, and they'll kick the can down the road until they get their invoice together, and then they'll start talking about money. Right. And by then they might be done with the project. And so what did you just do? You just were the bank. You just bankrolled their project. And why are you doing that? And I've consulted with restoration guys, and they're like, man, you asked for money up front? I said, yes. And they were like, you can? They don't get mad at you? And I was like,
Yeah.
why? This is a business.
It's a business. It's not a hobby, right?
Yeah. They kept getting mad. I mean, everybody has to understand that we're going to do the work and you're going to pay us.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one thing that I've spoken so much about on the show is the restoration industry is just one of those awkward industries, one of the few that's very apprehensive about asking for the order. Any other business, any other place, hey, look, you want product, you want service, this is the cost.
Yeah.
And I think that, part of that is just, the insurance side of billing and how it's created very, very, very weak salespeople. They get uncomfortable talking about money.
Yep.
And I don't think that enough leadership spends time getting their people ready psychologically to not make the sale based on their spending ability, as opposed to making the sale based on their customers' spending ability, right?
Yep.
So that's just a very interesting dynamic there is we built our business, our restoration company, based on 100% cash. Like AOB is like, what was that?
Yeah.
You're like, you're the person who has insurance. You go after your insurance, but I need to get paid now. And, maybe some people have said, hey, well, you just got lucky because you're in South Florida. It's a little bit more affluent. That'll never work. Like we were just at an event in Tampa, and we were talking a little bit about this off camera. And I was talking to, a couple of restoration contractors over there. And they're like, yeah, Rico, but you know what? I can't do that because I'm here in Tampa, and Tampa's a little bit different. I'm like, it's the exact same thing. You just think that it's different. Right. I was like, when was the last time you asked? I was like, well, I haven't, Yeah. And then on the side of their truck, it says no out-of-pocket expense. I was like, so you're just indoctrinating yourself, much less your customer, right? So it's just funny how that works. It's just asking for the order. And then, of course, like you said, having that progress billing. So part of eliminating the risk and mitigating the risk, if you will, for anybody who's interested in, looking at large loss and going after these commercial projects, first and foremost, get the education. Get the mentorship, know everything, and question everything, right? Even though I may have this, baseline of knowledge, constantly ask yourself, what is it that I don't know? What is it that I'm not aware of? So that's, basically step one, step two. Step two, get involved with another individual. Maybe they've got the deeper pockets, strategic partnerships. You can leverage each other's skill sets. All of these things are beautiful. And step three, ask for the order, ask for some money, right? Well, now that we've got all of those pieces that have just, perfectly fit together, really the last aspect of this is actually really just executing the project. So the question now becomes is, now that we have a little bit of knowledge, we were able to estimate rather quickly. We've got our relationships. We were able to, build up enough confidence to ask for the order and ask for cash. We're not floating this thing anymore. Well, now we're down to project management. Right. Yep. So tell me, like, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you see are the worst practices that a lot of companies are using when it comes down to project management, and then parlay that with what you believe makes for good, if not great, project management when it comes down to large loss and more complex projects?
Mm-hmm. Well, in over the years, the project manager title has changed quite a bit. And from when we started in the 80s, the project manager was the dude. The buck stopped with the project manager. And now you have project director, and you have all these different titles in different things. And the project manager has kind of become like somewhat of a senior technician, senior project manager type of thing. But the key, for project managers is, can you communicate? Communication is huge. You'd be surprised people get thrown off of $14 million jobs because they can't communicate with the client. And, the client's mad, so then the insurance company's mad, so then they bring in a consultant, and then the consultant brings in another company, and then they get kicked off because, and then there's a big fight. And all just because they couldn't communicate with the client. You'd be shocked.
Do you think that a lot of this is front-loaded communication? In other words, that because this is something that we see quite a bit in the industry, right? It's not really setting clear expectations to how this process is going to work. So do you think that a lot of these disconnects happen right at the beginning of the relationship, or do they start falling apart once they, get their contract signed?
Well, I think it kind of ties back into what we were saying, where people are afraid to ask for money. That's right. Communication. And if you're not communicating on that level to where it's a business, this is a business decision, we're signing a contract here, this is what we're going to do, here's our critical path that we're going to follow, here's our work plan, here's where, here's how many people we're going to have on the job, here's where we're going to be set up. All of that is communication, because the client needs to understand what the job is going to look like today, what it's going to look like tomorrow, and what it's going to look like at the end. And that has to be clear all the way through. And it's very important. I mean, I've had, I call it the disaster after the disaster. Don't be the disaster after the disaster. I have 4 things for project managers. Number 1, communications, customer communications. Number 2, don't be the disaster after the disaster. Number 3 is going to be, oh shoot, I just had a brain fart. It's going to be manage a gap. Manage the gap, because there's always a gap between our expectations and the client's expectations. Because think about our scope of work. We know what we have to do, but does the client understand, what we need to do? And so the main elements are communication, understand, and critical path management is my 4th item that I love. Critical path. Critical path tells the client when we're going to start, when we're going to finish each area. And so if we're doing a hotel, for example, what's the number 1 thing a hotel wants to know is, when do I get my heads and beds back? And you have to be able to do that. And you do that through communication. And so that's one of the things we touch on quite a bit is communications. It's one of the things that I love. Disaster after the disaster, that can be many different things. I've had my share. We did a very large campus in Southern California, prestigious campus, and 58 buildings are damaged, so we're setting equipment up on 58 buildings, overnight. So 24 hours, we almost have everything set. We've been out killing it. The guys are all over the place with forklifts. And the chancellor of the university will say, "Tom, why are you making my loss worse?"
Oh no.
And I was going, man, I came in here telling them, man, we got all the equipment set up. We were rocking and rolling.
Feeling good about yourself. All of a sudden, the guy comes in and says, man, this is a disaster.
No, well, he says, why are you making it worse? And I said, what do you mean? He says, you guys are driving on my lawn. You're messing up the grass. Right. And so in the grand scheme of things, for the restorer, we can come in, and the last thing we're thinking about is the lawn.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, you're saying, hey, you know what? Like, we've got a building here that we need to take care of. The grass will grow back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, but guess whose fault that was? That was my fault, because I didn't walk him through what his loss looks like right now, what it's going to look like tomorrow, and what it's going to look like when we're done. If I had let him, communicated more clearly to him that, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to have equipment going everywhere. Some grass might get messed up. We are going to fix it. Any landscape, issues, or if we move a bush, we'll put it back. Whatever we'll do it. We'll let you know, and communicate that right from the beginning, so that they know what's going to happen to their property. So then they're expecting it. So then when they come back the next day, they'll see that same job that you see, where it's like, man, we made all this progress overnight.
Exactly.
Because they see the job completely different than the restorer. And I think sometimes restorers come on the job and they think one of two things. They think that they're the most important person on the job, and they forget about the client. They think that they're the number one reason for everything. What restorers have to do when they come onto a project like that, a big university or something like that, is your name goes off of your shirt and theirs goes on. You are now working for them. You're now a representative of the university. And so everything that you do has to meet that quality. And so if you don't, then they're going to look at you like you're not equal to them, and you'll have to work on gaining their trust and everything else moving forward. So communication is key. Walking them through the process, being able to communicate the critical path and the work plan. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what's going to, the path, it's going to get darker before it gets lighter, but I promise that the light at the end of the tunnel isn't a train. It is the end of this project. It will happen. But to get there, we got to go through a little bit more of this. But we're going to take you there. We've been here. We've done this. Let us, guide you through it. Not let's come in here. We've done this. We've done that. We're the the kings of the hill. Bring them with you. Bring them along, or or
the other way of looking at it, right? The other way is like, you know what, you are the master of the universe, and you are in fact the pro, and you are in fact, you know exactly step by step what needs to be done, and this is how it's going to work: A, B, C, D, all the way down. And you want to make sure that the customer is well understood, but I think that having that degree of communication puts everybody on a level playing field, because as a general rule of thumb, most customers, residential and or commercial, they don't really mind a whole lot. What they mind is the surprises, what they didn't expect. Because if you walk in, just kind of using this example, you walk in and you say, hey, look, Rico, tomorrow this building's not going to have any grass left. Here's why: because we need A, B, C. And you walk in and you're like, oh, all right, cool. But, I walk in the next day and I realize, oh, look, everything he said is happening. But now I know that there's a solution, right? But it's always that unexpected thing, which kind of like leads me into, my one of my last questions, which is, no project rarely is 100% perfect, right? There's so many contingencies, so many things that happen. There are delays. There's, and depending on the size of the project, sometimes you can't source all of your equipment at once. There's a million different things, right? Personnel issues, additional damage that's found that kind of extends the timeline. You have all of these things. So while this is happening, and this kind of ties into the communication aspect of things, how should communication happen at those points? Like, as soon as you find additional damage, as soon as you realize that this maybe isn't going to be a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week thing, how should people go about communicating this to their clients, communicating it to the project managers, and all the way down the chain so that everybody is well informed?
The number one thing is managing changes and variances, and there isn't a perfect job. I've had one perfect job in 36 years, and it was a really good job. But there's going to be changes. There's going to be something, and so it's very important that everybody understand that from the very beginning. And where that starts is your scope of work, and so you have to have just a good scope of work. And so that when that change happens, that's outside of your scope, now you come back and you do a change order. That now adds to your contract. A lot of guys, we get back to, again, they're afraid to ask for money. They're afraid of change orders too. And it's like, well, change orders are not a bad thing if your scope is written correctly, because number one, where a lot of projects get messed up is right from the very beginning. When the scope it's not a good scope, and it's tied to a bad number, and the two of them don't match, you can have a lot of problems just a week in on a month-long project. You can have serious problems just 1 week in. Your project can already be in the tank, and you don't even know it. And so managing changes and variances is key. Having a good scope of work that everybody understands. The customer is always right if they understand the scope. So you don't want the customer interfering and taking you into areas that aren't part of your scope. You want to make sure that everybody knows what's in the scope and what's not in the scope, because that's very important when writing a scope, that you're defining what you're going to do for that money and what you're not going to do for that money. And then once you go outside of that scope, there will be a change. And so it's very important. Again, it's communications, it's confidence, it's, being able to, you come onto the job, you are the professional, you are the company, you've been in the end zone before. It's not your first rodeo, it's not the first time. And so don't act like it, don't act like, it's a business. Talk to the client like it's a business. Make sure that they understand, what the project is going to look like, what's in the scope, what's not in the scope, what the money covers and what it doesn't. And don't do any favors, unless you want to, but make sure that you're getting paid for what you're doing.
That's a great takeaway. Make sure that you're getting paid for what you're doing. And I think that regardless of large losses or complex projects, even on the smaller residential sides, I don't think I've ever met a contractor once that's walked into a project and hasn't heard the, hey, by the way, while you're here, would you mind just taking care of this one little thing? Right? Like as a contractor, we've always heard it. And, I think that a lot of us have fallen into that trap, right? Because you don't want to be a bad guy. You don't want to be confrontational. You want to be accommodating. And sometimes it's small, but when you start adding up a lot of these little small things, right? It's like, hey, that's time, that's money, that's labor, that's materials, it's a whole other, side of your business that you're just letting go. So just having those, what some would consider to be difficult conversations, and be like, hey, by the way, this is the business, this is what we're doing, this is what's covered. All of these other things are not covered. And if you want them covered, we can address them, we can help with those, but it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's, I've gone away home for the weekend, we've had big projects going on, that are 3 months long, and I go home over the weekend, come back on Monday, and the crew is in a different part of the building. And it's like, all right, so what are you guys doing in that part of the building? Who told you to go in that building? While you were gone, the customer, said they wanted, and all this stuff. And so while you're gone, they'll try, and they don't want to say no, so it's like, oh, so now we're working in a building that's not part of the scope. And so now you got to have to come to pieces with the owner and say, all right, look, I know, but here's what we got to do. And so it's I've only had maybe one job in my career that sucked, and so I've always gotten a long way by communicating, by when in a number one thing too, not only just letting them know what it's going to look like now, what it's going to look like tomorrow, what it's going to look like when we're done. But what if there's that thing that happens that no one knows about yet, and it's like, bad news does not get better with time. And so if there's something that happened on that job that they don't know about yet, you need to have that conversation with them. Do not let them find out from anyone else but you that there is something that has happened on their project that they need to know about. Make sure that doesn't happen, because then that becomes a disaster after the disaster. And we don't want to be that company. We want to be the go-to company. We want to be the company that they call, if they're having a question about, football season. We want them calling up, asking us how a football season is going to go. Just simple stuff, because guess what's going to happen? They're going to call us on the big stuff. And so we want to make sure that they trust us, that we're honest, and if something is wrong, we want to make sure they know about it right when it's wrong, not when the invoice shows up and it's like, oh, well, by the way, we're $400,000 over budget or something, and that's not a good day.
That's not a good day for anybody involved, right? So Tom, man, thank you so much for spending this time here with us. And obviously, there's so much more that we could discuss. There's only X amount that we could really start scratching the surface inside of an hour.
Yep.
But for all of our listeners, all of our dominators out there that are listening, if they want to learn more about larger loss, if they want to learn more about how to handle and estimate and manage these more complex projects, where would they go online to find you, your company, and to get this education that they need so they can get the ball rolling?
They can go to largelossmastery.com, and they can send me an email directly at tom@largelossmastery.com, and I will gladly they can ask me anything that they want, and we've got. They can go online to our class and check out our class schedule. We also have an online video series if they're not quite ready or wanting to go through the expense of the class. They can go to the online video series and do that. I recommend doing the live courses. We dive deep into estimating, contracting, scoping, critical path management, production rate, complex project management. We get into all of it. We give you the tools that you need to succeed and to break down the barriers and to get outside the box and feel comfortable outside the box.
Perfect. And for everybody out there, I will leave a link in the video description as well as in the show notes below. Make sure that you go ahead and check them out. If large loss commercial properties are projects, if that's something that you wanted to get into and weren't sure exactly how, or you realize that you had a couple of gaps in your knowledge base and you want to go ahead and have those gaps filled, well, this may exactly be the solution you've been looking for. So make sure that you go ahead and check out the link below. And Tom, once again, man, thank you so much for being on the show. We appreciate you. We appreciate you time. And remember, Restoration Domination, hustle, hack, and dominate.
You've been listening to Restoration Domination, interviewing the restoration business's top industry insiders, the movers and shakers, the hustlers and hackers. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. Hook up with us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Restoration Domination to catch video interviews, highlights, and behind-the-scenes content. And follow your host at Rico Garcia Jr. Till next time, this is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, dominate.